Today, we are exploring a topic that is essential for every leader, and that is learning how to lead from your upper brain. And our guest today is someone who has spent basically his career, dare I say, your life, helping leaders do exactly that. And Dr. Michael Frisina is a renowned expert in leadership neuroscience, and he has over 40, maybe it's more than that, years of experience in the military, healthcare, multiple corporate sectors. And I know that there's a lot more that I do not even know about. And he is the author of multiple books, with my favorite one being Leading with Your Upper Brain: How to Create, we talk about creating great, the behaviors that unlock performance excellence. So I have to tell you, you had me at hello, you had me at this title. So Dr. Frisina, I want to say thank you for being here. You are a renowned expert, and I would love to start just by having you share a little bit about yourself and your journey, especially your experience in leadership and what led you to neuroscience. Was there a defining moment when you realized that this was the missing piece for leaders, or what was your journey like?
Well, thank you, Tracy, first of all, for the opportunity, and thank you all for tuning in. And let's dispense with titles. It's just Michael. Um, that's, I just prefer that. I feel more comfortable with that because it's more inclusive. And that gets to a
Mm.
point of leadership right away, right?
Yes.
Leadership has to be about presence, and leadership has to be about connecting. Anything that gets in the way of you connecting with other people as a leader is going to be an obstacle to leadership effectiveness. I arranged my office in a way that I never had a barrier, physical barrier between me and anyone that I was talking to, whether they were my boss who came into my office or whether they were people that I worked with. So how you arrange your
Mm.
desk, physical space, right? Being approachable. All of this is tantamount to how the brains of other people are affected by our behavior. And that's the real key to all of this. It's that when I behave in a certain way, and I like to say, that when I behave in a way that turns on the upper brains of other people, they'll follow me anywhere. Uh,
Hmm.
it's all about the neuroscience part. And the question I typically get asked about that, Tracy, and what I've been doing through those 40 plus years, I've often had to answer the difference between leadership influence and manipulation. And we
Mm.
don't have to worry about that because the brains of other people decide for them whether I'm influencing them or manipulating them. So I
Mm.
don't get the benefit of manipulating someone unless they're in their lower brain. Upper brain people see it, feel it, they respond to it. You can't fake this to make it. The science of this is so evident and so apparent. And it's what we used to say in philosophy when I was teaching logic and other philosophy courses. It's sort of prima facie. In other words, we know it's true because we experienced it to be true in our own lives. Every one of us on this call right now knows what it's been like to work for a really ineffective leader and what
Mm.
that did to us mentally, emotionally, the spiritual energy, physical energy, our overall health dynamic, whether we're popping Tums every 5 minutes to cut anti-antacid stuff. You had to have, colonoscopies and endoscopies for
Hmm.
reflux, you know, ineffective leaders at best and toxic leaders at worst affect the physical, mental, spiritual, emotional health of people. And,
Hands down.
and that's what really got me into this is when I started my military career and started it at the end of Vietnam and experienced toxic military leadership from post-Vietnam
Mm.
culture and post-Vietnam officer behavior, lying, stealing, self-promotion, um, all of that stuff. And the retention of officers during that time was very low
Hmm.
because if you came on with active duty with an idealistic view, and this happened to retention with many West Point graduates as well, and then you
Hmm.
encountered leadership that was the embodiment of everything that was the opposite of what you were expecting to do, um, you made choices and you left. I made an opposite choice. I decided to stay and try to change it.
Hmm. Yeah, in multiple ways.
Actually resigned my commission twice over ethical reasons, and then pulled it at the last minute and stayed on active duty because we were able to get issues resolved. But this is how serious this has been for me.
I did not know that. That's really interesting. We'll have to get into that at another time. Here's what you said. Multiple things that are really interesting. And you specifically said the embodiment. So you started off by saying, please call me Michael so that there's not a barrier. Then you mentioned the desk and making sure that there was no space. Are there other very simple practical tips like that that you can think of that help someone establish that connection even possibly before they even open their mouth?
Sure. There's a communication tool called appreciative inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of using declarative sentences that can be accusatory at times, even when we don't mean them to be, it can put people on the defensive. You just ask questions. So you just ask questions, something as simple as, how are you doing today, Tracy? And really mean it and expect an answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm embarrassed to say I learned that from mistakes. And one of the mistakes I made once was asking somebody how they were doing. And they told me, and they were serious in what they told me about something that was going on with them. And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
listen
Mm-hmm.
effectively. I didn't listen. I'll say I wasn't listening at all. It was sort of like a perfunctory, rhetorical, hey, how are you doing? And when they
Mm-hmm.
finished telling me something very significant, I said, well, that's really great. I hope you have a good day. And she looked me right in the eye and said, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. She said, did you listen to anything I just said to you?
Ooh. Mm.
And so this taught me about courage, accountability. How I stay in my upper brain is when someone's willing to say to me, did you not listen to what I just said? And I said, and I was honest. I didn't try to backtrack it and
Mm-hmm.
sugarcoat it, which would have just made it worse. And I would have lost leadership connection with this person forever. There would have been no rebuilding that breach of trust. And I looked at her and I said, I am so sorry. I was so wrong. Would you please forgive me? Would you tell me again and give me a second chance? Now,
Mm.
I continued to work with that person for a couple of years, and we had this thing where, we do this thing, eyes on eyes.
I
And
see you.
every time I asked a question to her in the future after that, how are you doing? We do this. And it was my signal to her, I really want to know because I really care and I'm really listening. And I've had the opportunity of seeing her at different professional events. We parted ways, but we run in the same professional circles. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually saw her as frequent as about a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
So now this probably happened, without exaggeration, probably 20 years ago. And
Mm.
we saw each other, and I went, Holly, how are you doing? And she goes, I'm fine. How are you? And then we do
I
this little
see
small
you.
thing. And then I say, now how
Yeah.
are you really doing? And then we have a conversation.
Yeah. It's really interesting when you say that. There are a couple of things that pop out for me in that healthy leader operating system. When we talk about, we have one communication model, and the very first step is to go out, meaning get out of yourself. And you said, and really mean it. I want to double underline that. Really mean it when you ask those appreciative inquiry questions, or those open ended questions, or that reflective listening. And so that I see you, there's an African greeting, Sawubona, which is I see you. Have you heard that?
I haven't, but I love it. It's wonderful. And because it draws the other person in. And what most people don't know is this isn't just niceties or civility. Their brain is triggering
Yes.
neurochemically and neurophysiological responses to the encouragement, to the compassion, to the empathy. And this is why I said earlier, if you do these things and practice these things as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
it has to work because the brains of people has to work the way the brain is designed to work. An easy way of thinking about upper brain, lower brain distinction is I'm about helping the brains of other people work the way their brain is designed to work for performance, achievement, growth, development, and health. And that health is a holistic health. Their mental
Mm-hmm.
health, their emotional health, their physical health, their spiritual health. And so if we behave as leaders in a way that affects the brains of other people, the way that brain is affected in a positive way, they can't help but be drawn to us, ingratiate themselves to us, go above and beyond mission requirements. And they show up every day in a high level of engagement. Engagement is someone showing up to work,
Mm-hmm.
ready to fulfill on the obligations that further the best interest of the organization rather than fulfilling their own self-interest.
And that's an important point right there. I want to rewind a little bit when you talked about the science of the upper brain, and I want to make sure that everybody gets what you just said in terms of it's not just about being nice or kind, or those are all great, but really what you're doing is based in neuroscience.
Yes, I'm behaving in a way that behavior triggers the brains of other people to respond in such a way that produces in them emotion, thoughts, a mindset that
Mm-hmm.
create a downstream flow of positive brain activity versus negative, or performance or productive brain activity versus disruptive, unproductive brain activity,
Mm-hmm.
where they now can focus. It's about, we've heard so much about psychological safety and creating safe spaces.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of faddish. In neuroscience, what we're doing is we're creating an operating environment within the brain. Think of it as a computer hard drive and the operating system of a computer. This is a virus protector. This is neuroscience malware for somebody's brain,
Right. Oh, I love
right?
it.
And unfortunately, ineffective leaders and toxic leaders insert viruses into the operating systems of brains of people, where effective leaders are setting up a firewall, protecting so that the operating system can function with the inserted programs to produce the output that that brain was designed to produce.
I love that. And I think that that's helpful for a lot of us who do kind of think in that linear, we want some science-backed facts that support why am I not just go, 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 let's get it, let's get these results. Why am I actually taking the time to back out and actually engage somebody else with their upper brain? And that's one of the things. I want to go to page 18 on your book. As I said, you had me at hello with the title of your book. And then when I saw, which by the way, this is the book that's got, it's just got writing and tabs and everything in it. And on page 18, you start off right at the beginning with three behavior based equations for performance. So I want to start with the first one. You talk about effective leadership, and you say that as a function of self awareness and self management. And that by itself aligns perfectly with the healthy leader operating system. We talk about it in terms of the T cycle, which is TEA, thoughts, emotions, and actions. And so we talk about cultivating effective personal leadership by focusing on those three skills over and over and over again: mental, emotional, physical. So, my question for you is, we have different skills that we use to practice in each one of those areas. So, for the mental, it might be that we are practicing meditation and we're going to focus on a mantra so that we can really keep our brains focused. For the emotional, maybe we're doing heart math or recognizing what an emotion feels like in our body. And then for the action, maybe we're saying, okay, I'm going to practice literally putting down my telephone when my spouse is in the room so that I can practice connecting with them. What type of tactics or tools or techniques do you have to help people with effective leadership in terms of their personal leadership and the way that they're behaving?
Well, the first is the self-awareness component itself. And notice on all three of those equations, they're multiplicative. So any number times zero is zero, right?
Right.
So you can have all the self-awareness in the world, but if you don't practice any self-management, the outcome is zero. When you take self-awareness and self-management and practice it intentionally
Mm-hmm.
uh, with all these tips and tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then with a level of high effectiveness, you now take that with culture of the organization. So we have the social norms of behaviors that we're willing to tolerate and accept and promote within the culture. You experienced this as a West Point cadet. There was a culture of West Point. You
Sure.
assimilated into that culture. If you didn't assimilate in, you assimilated out.
Right.
Right? You get deselected because you have to be able to align your personal core values to those cultural core values. And this doesn't mean uniformity, right? But it does mean diversity with a harmony of a collective dynamic that aims to the same target. When we agree on what the outcome is, we can
Mm-hmm.
employ a variety of pathways to get to that target, but the ultimate end goal is the target. So when you take effective leadership and you have a culture that allows for the expression of this individuality, both in behavior and in technical skill, now you create the engagement dynamic. That's how you create engagement. You wake people up to wanting to come to work to foster the goals and interests of the organization by giving them that freedom to self-express, which generates their own sense of achievement and personal worth. And now you've got engagement. Then you take that engagement, which is the
Mm-hmm.
foundation of behavior capacity, and you multiply it to the level of someone's technical skill. Now you drive performance and well-being. So they cascade, but they're all multiplicative. And this is why we have to start with effective leaders first. Because if you don't
Mm-hmm.
have effective leadership, you can't get in aligned culture. If you don't have aligned culture, you don't get engagement. If you don't get engagement, you don't have high behavior capacity. If you don't have a high behavior capacity, you can't leverage performance or technical skills to higher levels of performance. And it's
Right.
all science based, right?
Wow, that was great. You just went through all three of them.
That's right. And this is where you've got to get rid of concepts about personality based performance because personality doesn't have, there's no science. I know this is a very bold claim, but no one's been able to refute it yet. And I've been saying it for decades. There's
Hmm.
no science to personality and personality traits to performance. It's all behavior based. And behavior based dynamics are totally different than personality based, right? So there isn't a compassionate personality.
Right. Right.
Passion
It's
is
behavior.
exhibited in behavior, right? You
Hmm.
do something that someone experiences. And just as a quick proof text for our group this afternoon, if someone has ever done an act of kindness for you, your brain secretes oxytocin and serotonin. The oxytocin is a social bonding chemical. It gives you the feeling that this person is being kind to me, this person must care for me, this is a person that I would want to be with, right?
Hmm.
And the serotonin comes in to increase the trust level dynamic of that. When someone does an act of kindness to you, you get a dose of both of those things automatically by experiencing the behavior of an act of kindness. And this is why it's so important when leaders try to do Leaders Appreciation Day.
Hmm.
Appreciation is a return of something for what was traded by the individual who's being appreciated. There's a quid pro quo dynamic there.
Oh,
This is
that's
why
interesting.
appreciation days and typically fail. One, because people know they're getting something for something they've done, and they may be getting something that has no intrinsic value to them, whether it's tangible or intangible. So they may not feel appreciated at all because the act that this other person is doing doesn't trigger for them because there are four brain patterns, four different ways of feeling appreciated. But the idea of a random act of kindness, someone just being kind to you with, you know, when they're being thoughtful, full of thought for you versus just appreciating you, when they do an act of kindness to you and you say, what was that for? And they say, nothing.
Right. Right. And you do that
All
quite
of
a
a
bit. I've
sudden,
seen you
the
do that
level
with.
of neurochemical trigger just goes up like the 4th of July. And the level of cortisol, the oxytocin and serotonin goes up. Now, here's the real cool thing. When you do a random act of kindness for somebody, just out of
I was
thoughtfulness
just going to
for
ask
them,
you about this. Yep.
you get the same dose of oxytocin and serotonin that they get by receiving your act of kindness. But
Yes.
here's the real kicker beyond that. If I'm a casual observer, if I'm in the hallway, if I'm in a meeting room, and I'm observing you doing the act of kindness, I get the same level of serotonin and oxytocin just watching it that you two got by being actually in the event. And I've just observed it. You see, this is the power of the behavior component. You can't get anything. All the leadership stuff that is personality based can't do any of this. It can't demonstrate any of this. It doesn't work to do anything about this. And to make self-awareness, to self-management, personality based rather than behavior based is to completely miss the mark. This is why these programs get bought, taught, and rarely used because they
Put
don't
in a
produce
drawer.
outcome. Because your brain will override anything else in how you're experiencing behavior of somebody else, irrespective of knowing whether they're an ENFJ or, and I'm speaking now specifically to Myers-Briggs, which has
Right.
no science base to performance and well-being. It just doesn't.
Right.
But people will buy it and spend millions and millions of dollars for leadership development based on a Myers-Briggs. And someone
Hmm.
asked me this the other day, why do leaders still do it? Sacred cow, typically cheap, easy to deploy, and they really don't care about the outcomes. And that's the most important thing. If you really don't care about the outcome, if you do leadership development just as smoke and mirrors and just to say you do, you can
To
go
check a
buy
block.
anything. You can go buy
Yeah.
anything and check the box. And then
Well,
live
you
with the failed results over and over and over again.
Right, right. I just had a discussion similar to that with somebody that I was working with who is in a hospital setting, which you're very familiar with. But before we go into that, I want to cycle back to what you just said, which is so exciting to me that I almost want to like jump out of my skin. That it's not just good for the person who's receiving the act of kindness, it's good for the person who's giving it, and it's good for everybody else who gets to witness that. So my question for you has to do with next month in the Healthy Leader Inner Circle, this month when we start in January, we go back to self-leadership and self-awareness and self-management and a lot of the same stuff that you talk about in your book. And that's what everybody is reading is your book this month. Next month, we're talking about energy and specifically the energy of emotions. So, can you, and I am fascinated by the concept of forgiveness and the idea that I used to think that when you forgive somebody, that that was something for them, that we were just doing it for them. So, do you, I know we didn't really prep or talk about this, but can you speak to the power of forgiveness in all of this?
Sure. The, and with forgiveness is not just us forgiving somebody else, but the power of us being willing to ask for forgiveness. There is no greater, and when I think about people ask me all the time, give me one thing I can do that would maximize my leader effectiveness. And it is learn to confess your faults with great humility and be willing to ask forgiveness through an effective apology. The brain loves the number three. The book is divided into three parts. There's three equations. The brain just loves the number three. And it's all around us in the universe, time, space, matter, engineering principles, force, matter, acceleration. I mean, we're just in a world of threes. Children's literature, Three Little Pigs, Three Blind Mice, The Three Bears. It's not four, five, two. It's three and
Three.
three and three and three. So the effective apology starts with, I was very wrong. I'm willing to accept responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sorry. I have regret for what I did to your upper brain and what messing with your upper brain has done to you emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, your health. I've disrupted your health dynamic. And this is what we don't understand about chronic negative stress over time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a physiological body, mental, emotional killer. I have at least 26 different physical diseases, cancer included, that can be triggered in the body, the free radical cells of cancer, triggered by negative chronic negative stress exposure. So what we're talking about here is something that can revolutionize the quality of life of people at work, at home, personal relationships, professional relationships, because the chronic negative stress dynamic is a killer. And so one of the things that the apology does, what forgiveness does, is it
Mm-hmm.
reduces the level of this negative stress chronically that you carry in you from the hurt unresolved from somebody and the bitterness and resentment that carried by both parties by not resolving whatever conflict brought them into this dysfunctional relationship.
Right.
And so the three components: responsibility, I was wrong; regret, remorse, I'm so sorry; and the reconciliation and restoration, redemption of relationship. Would you please forgive me? Remember, Holly, I told you early in the call, Holly, I was very wrong. I'm very sorry. Would you please forgive me?
I was just thinking about that.
And
Right.
there is neurochemical and neurophysiological power in that. When you choose to bear a grudge, to not forgive, you create in yourself a constant agitation of negative stress. So um, people say Nelson Mandela quoted this, some say Mother Teresa. We don't know where it came from originally, but the
Mm-hmm.
truth is this, because they all said some variety of this.
Mm-hmm.
When you hold on to resentment and bitterness into your heart and you're unwilling to let it go by giving forgiveness to the other person, even if they don't know you're forgiving them, because it isn't for their benefit, it's
That's an
you're
important part.
releasing this bitterness and resentment. You failing to do that is like drinking from a cup of poison, believing they're going to die.
I
So
have a
you
post
can
that
have all
says
this
that. Yep.
bitterness, you can have all this resentment, you can hold on to all of this unforgiveness. They don't even know you feel this way toward them. So
Mm-hmm.
none of that in you is having any effect on them at all. It's just
Right.
destructive to you.
Right.
So this is where we teach this. I teach this professionally. There's 5 steps to forgiveness. The first is you've got to acknowledge the hurt, right? We don't dismiss pain. We don't tell people not to pretend it didn't happen because
Awareness.
that's cruel. Some people have experienced tremendous trauma
Mm-hmm.
in certain life events. So we're going to acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the acknowledging of it, we're going to tell you, but you don't have to let it control you. And the purpose of forgiveness is you taking power over the event rather than the event having control and power over you.
I just heard release the experience, keep the wisdom in terms of
Mhm.
forgiveness. Yeah. Okay, so now you got to tell us the other steps now.
Okay, so you've got to acknowledge the event, right? Then you have to acknowledge the person. You
Oh,
literally
interesting
have to
distinction.
name them and connect them to the hurt. Okay. Number
Okay.
three, you've got to release the event. You've got to choose volitionally with the power that you have in the upper brain to cut yourself off from the event. In Roman history, it's very grotesque, but one of the ways Romans would punish prisoners, they would chain them to a dead body. So wherever you went, you had to carry or drag this corpse with you. And of course, it would get old and stinky and rotting and diseased, and wild animals could be drawn to it. So if you didn't disconnect yourself from that corpse as quickly as you can, it became a threat to you. This is
That's
what people
powerful.
do who don't release the event. They carry it with them like a dead corpse full of disease and other threats, waiting to infect them well beyond anything that they would imagine because they want health, but they're contributing to the opposite of that through their own volitional choice. So, number three is you release the event. Number four, you release the person also. There's two components of this. You've got to be willing to say, I'm opening up my heart like a prison cell, and I see the person inside, and I'm giving them a full pardon and asking them to leave my heart.
Was that
And
number? Okay.
number five is you start to pray and meditate, or what, this is the spiritual component of this,
Yeah.
good things into that person's life. You've really forgiven someone when you're willing to hope good things in their life, regardless of their acknowledgement to you. The knowledge, see, they don't even need to know you're doing these five things.
Right.
Right now, ideally, it would be nice if you ever get the chance to confront them, in some way, or they have a self realization that they've hurt you and come to you to say,
Hmm.
I want to acknowledge what I've done, but the benefits of this work, even without that apology,
Of course, right? Because it's about your upper brain, not
it's all
not
about
them,
you.
not
Right.
about the external
You're
environment.
doing this for your legitimate self best interest. And this is where common sense comes in. This idea, look, when you explain this to somebody and you say, do you really want to be healthy? There's a biblical illustration of this that I love. Jesus is at the pool of Siloam at the Jewish temple. And
Hmm.
all of these people had this belief that an angel would come and stir the waters of the pool, and whoever got in first could get healed of whatever their infirmity was. So there's a guy who's been laying there about 40 years, and he's still lame. He can't walk because when the water gets stirred, he can't get in it, and nobody
Right.
helps him. So Jesus asked
Hmm.
him an interesting question. Do you want to be made well? And the guy starts giving him all kinds of excuses about why he can't get in the water. And I'm going to paraphrase here. It's like Jesus like, hey, dude, I didn't ask you to give excuses about why you can't get in the water. I asked you, did you want to be healed? Right.
What do
And then
you
the guy
want?
still starts to give excuses, right? What is it you really want? See, this
Yes.
is true for any goal, right? Any goal that you set for yourself, you got to be crystal clear about what do you want, right?
Yes.
So the guy continues to give him excuses, and without the guy doing anything,
Hmm.
Jesus heals him. He's immediately healed, and then he says, "Pick up your bed, get up and walk. You're healed."
You're
And
healed.
now the guy's
Yeah.
rejoicing. But he never actually asked for nor participated in that healing. But the point of it is, here he has this opportunity to be healed, and he wants to stay lame and make excuses for why he's still lame. We do
Hmm.
this all the time. We cripple ourselves emotionally, and the reason for this is because all of this is lower brain behavior.
Right.
But when I can get into somebody's lower brain and say, what do you really want? Do you want to be better? Do you want your life to be better? Do you want more positive, productive emotions? Do you want to stay trapped in this event, trapped to the power that this person and this event has over you? Is that what you really want? Well, no, no, I don't want that. I said, fine, then
Right.
let me help you get something else. Let me help
Hmm.
you move you from your lower brain to your upper brain, and you can start experiencing life at a higher quality.
Well, the interesting thing about that, and I was kind of giggling a little bit, is because not only do I notice this when I'm coaching people, but I also notice this coming out of my own mouth at times. And when you say, what do you want? It is because of our cognitive biases and because of the training and because of the power of the lower brain and that we have given it, that we often will say, well, what I don't want is for that person to do X, Y, Z. What I don't want is to be tired. And oftentimes I just let people go through that until we get to, okay, so then what do you want? And let's try to say it in a positive way. And that is like a mental gym exercise to go from let me blame out there or in here and actually what do I want? That's a hard question for a lot of people.
Well, this goes back to one of your earlier questions that we're sort of hitting answers along the way to multiple questions. What do I do to self-calibrate in my self-awareness, self-management, and leader effectiveness? The first thing is I listen to my self-talk. Am I talking in a way that my words and my sentences and my thought reflect what I'm trying to avoid, or am I talking away in what I want to achieve? And there's a big difference between
Huge.
setting a goal that's oriented by avoiding what you don't want versus
Right.
setting a goal and an objective of what you want to achieve.
Right.
Focusing on what you want and what you want to achieve is upper brain. Focusing a goal on what you're trying to avoid is all lower brain. And
Totally.
we never get to the highest level of ourselves by achieving goals and avoidance. We get there by what we achieve in something that's positive, productive, supportive to others, bigger than ourselves,
Right.
inclusive of um,
So let me ask you this. All right, we get it. We understand, right? So that's in the middle of what we call the external models. There's an external circumstance, and we have a thought about it, creates our emotions, and we have actions, and then we create results. And what you're saying is it's not just about the results, it's about how you're managing your upper brain during that. So here's my question. If we know all of this, and many of the people on this call do, they understand the way that this works. Can you help us understand why it's so difficult, even when you have awareness, to actually go to the mental gym and in that moment to flip the switch, to go from, okay, I'm not thinking negative anymore. Like, what is it that I do want? Why is this so hard?
well, part of it's physiology, right? You have to work at being intentional. Everything about the
Great
upper brain
sentence.
is intention. You have to be full of purpose. You have to be full of meaning. You have to identify real value, but you've got to do the work. And this principle is, I can go into great writing, thousands of years old, and find this principle.
Right. It's not new.
You have to take where you are with what you want, but now you have to be willing to do the work to get there. You don't get there on a free ride. There's no free pass. You have to be purposeful. You have to be intentional. You have to be disciplined. You have to do the work, right? Well, the opposite of that doesn't take any work at all. You just default to your lower brain.
And
You're
why
in a
does that
neutral
happen?
environment with no threat, and you're not working on trying to go to your upper brain, you'll default to your lower brain because you got to be in one or the other, or some movement of spectrum of moving to the upper brain or moving to the lower brain.
Talk
So
to me,
part of the
talk more about
physiology,
that. Yeah.
the physiology, part of the lower brain's dynamic is to keep us in a survival mode,
Right.
right? So thriving requires all of that other stuff. Surviving just means I'm trying to avoid this, or I'll try to avoid this, or I won't do this. It's all negative orientation. And people call this the reptilian brain and other sorts of things.
Right.
The lower brain is comprised of parts of the brain physiologically, the limbic part of the brain with the amygdala, the thalamus, the hippocampus, secreting cortisol. And the thing with cortisol, it's supposed to slow our thinking down to get us to focus, to determine, am I in a real threat or is it imaginary? The problem is the brain can't distinguish between real threats and imaginary threats. This is where my cognitive awareness has to be real. You know, if
Mm-hmm.
if I'm in the dark, which is only one of two natural fears, loud noises and darkness are the only two natural fears, phobia in the Greek. And all the other phobias in the list of all of them are all acquired fears. We only have two innate fears, dark
I did
and
not know that.
um,
I,
and so think about how much other garbage you can get out of your life by knowing that if you're afraid of something other than the dark and loud noises, you've acquired that through some life experience,
that's powerful.
or it was, compelled into you if you were forced or coerced into it. So the point of all this is to say, again, we've got to go back to the neuroscience base of this, and we've got to continue to build on, what does the brain do? And we've just scratched the surface. What we've known just in the last 10 years, there's been an explosion of neuroscience truth that's just debunking decades and decades and decades and decades of things that we thought we could do to get better, and they just didn't work. So
Right.
we just kept trying to do them harder, right? And so the dynamic here is uh, maintaining a positive orientation to what you really want versus a negative orientation, unproductive orientation of what you're trying to avoid. So
Hmm.
one of the things we do is we pay attention to our talk, both our self-talk mentally and what actually comes out of our mouth. So this is where we need both an individual, right, sort of will and skill, but a
Hmm.
social dynamic of will and skill.
Right.
So if
Support.
you heard me say something in the negative, you could stop me immediately and say, Michael, you framed that in the negative. And then now the key is I can take that very same statement that I said in a negative way and flip it and say it in a positive way. And I challenge people to do this. Pick something and say it negatively. And now let's flip it. And how could you say what you just said in a negative way, say it in a positive way, a productive way, a supportive way, constructive versus destructive, that kind of
So, in the midst of that, what you're making me think of something is that I either cross my fingers or my dog just sat down here, or I cross my arms like that. And you can see if you say to somebody, "Hey, you just said that in the negative," and you talked about it before and you have their permission, and you said, "Hey, you just said that in the negative," and they're still like really upset at whatever happened. How do you unhinge? How do you go from, all right, I know that that's right intellectually, but emotionally, I'm not ready to let it go.
We have tag phrases. Here's one. Don't take a difficult event and make it worse by choosing to respond in the lower brain.
Hmm.
If you're already in a difficult event and you want to
Right.
resolve the challenge of that event, the trauma of that event, the pain of that event, the worst thing you can do is now choose to respond to it with your lower brain, because you're only going to magnify the intensity of everything that's wrong with what you're experiencing. So
Yeah,
that's
I love that. Yeah.
so reframing and refocusing exercises are very important. And you already talked about a causal effect relationship in your own model, right? I add one thing ahead of the thinking, and that's focus. What are you seeing in the event? What are you choosing to focus in the event? Because I contend that when you look at the event and your first thought is to say something negative about it, I can
Right.
find positive to say about it. It's even something as simple as I got a flat tire on my way to the office today. I could choose to let that ruin my whole day. Or I
Mhm.
could say, yeah, I got a flat tire. That was bad for me, but it's sure going to be good for the repair shop that's going to repair the tire, take 60 bucks from me and make it the tire, and providing
Right.
for someone's income living who's going to feed their family this week. And my orientation to me getting a flat tire completely changes when I take myself out of the situation and insert other people for how did someone else benefit well from what I had to endure as an inconvenience. And this can be true even from significant life events, as well as an insignificant one or a minor one. So
Right.
we manage our self-talk. We start thinking in a totally different way, but we think differently because our mindset sets us up to think differently. It's
Right.
all
Very
in the mindset,
consciously.
what I choose first. So my focus determines what I see. So if I start with a positive upper brain focus, now my thoughts, my emotions, my energy, and my outcome is all upper brain.
Right.
But if I let my focus go lower brain, now I only see what the lower brain, oh, that's bad. Oh, that's a threat. Oh, you need to run away. Oh, you need to do this. Oh, you need to be bitter, resentful. Then
Right.
my thoughts now become full of all of that. My emotions become self-toxic as well as
Hmm.
toxic to others. And the outcome obviously is extremely deleterious and detrimental. And the way you get someone who's doing this and
Hmm.
saying, I don't want to do it, I said, then tell me what you really want.
There we
Because
are again.
every
Right.
behavior has a payoff to something.
Well, it's
So
a hundred.
what I say to them is, so you really want to be self-centered. You really want to be entitled to your bitterness and resentment. You think it's okay to do this and not suffer health effects from it. And then you're going to blame shift all that to somebody else, because it all has to start with personal responsibility and accountability. You've got,
Ta-da.
don't ground someone first. Um, in my first book, Influential Leadership, I
Hmm.
talk about these core-based principles. And the first one is core values. You know, and when I see somebody behaving in a way differently than what they say they believe, I challenge them on the the lack of coherence, it's called, right?
Hmm.
The lack
Hmm.
of congruence, the lack of
Hmm.
harmony. You say you believe this, but I watch you behave this way. Now, either you believe it and you're choosing to behave differently, or this is how you really want to behave and you really don't believe the core values. So which is it? And in order for you to get any kind of peace in your life, you're going to have to reconcile that. You're either going to have to change your behavior to match what you say you really believe. So if you say you believe in kindness, you're going to have to start acting in kind behavior. If a core value is honesty, you're going to have to start telling the truth and stop lying every other word that comes out of your mouth.
Right.
If you say,
Or even a little bit. It doesn't have to
or
be
even a
every other
little
word,
lie,
even just a
yeah.
tiny bit. Right.
If you say you believe in integrity, you've got to start behaving in a way that says you're not a hypocrite, that
A
you
hundred
know
percent.
what you got to match, right? So
Yeah.
cliche, and I don't like cliches, so I don't use cliches, but here's one, right? You
Yeah.
got to really walk your talk. Okay, but let's forget the cliche now. So you really have to match your behavior to your core values. So if you're unwilling to change your behavior, then for your sake, at least be honest with yourself and be real to others and change your core value. I did this with a physician and
Mm.
was going to lose his credentialing privileges at a hospital. And so when I showed up for my first meeting with him, he said, "So you're the guy that's going to fix me?" And I said, "No, I don't do that. But if you
Mm.
want to fix yourself, I can guide you in that process. So why don't you start by telling me what you think about yourself?" And he says, "I'm an egomaniacal." And he said SOB, and he said it. I said,
Hmm.
"Well, I appreciate your honesty." And I said, "Tell me about how you think about yourself that way." He goes, "I love it. I
Ooh.
love intimidating people. I love being in charge. I love being in control." And I said, "Well, how's that working for you so far in your life?" He'd already
Mm.
been divorced 4 times. He was now sitting with his attorney in this first meeting about keeping his credentials and privileging to work at this hospital. None of the other physicians liked him at all, and he didn't care. He won the golf club championship over the CEO of the hospital in a playoff hole, and he knew everybody was rooting for the CEO to beat him, but he funked this long putt to save par or something, and he won the hole, so he won the club championship. And he turned and took his putter like a machine gun and went bah, 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 like he was shooting everybody
Oh my
around.
goodness.
I mean, this is just how out there this guy was in his behavior. Um, but what I first thing I said is, you know, you will not be successful in your life continuing to behave this way. And so
Hmm.
we talked to the dynamics of all of this. First thing, accept personal responsibility and accountability. Let's define some positive core values, real legitimate core values. Let's create a purpose statement for you.
Hmm.
And now let's align all of that together with you believing that if you accept personal accountability and responsibility for what you do, you get 2 sets of outcomes. Now, tell me what you really want.
What you really, really want. What do you really, really want?
Right.
Yeah.
Because if anything, if you want something very positive, productive, you can't keep behaving the way you're behaving. Your behavior and your mental process of mindset is going to be incongruent to what you're telling me you want.
And we
So,
need to align it.
and so this is what we do. We literally walk through these physical elements of behaviors to outcomes, and all of it is cause and effect relationship. There's
Hmm.
literally these tipping dominoes upstream, downstream, and it all comes out eventually in the outcome. And so if you want to change the outcome, I tell this all the time, nothing changes in outcomes till your thinking changes. And anything can change in outcomes when your thinking changes. I
I
think that
love
might be
that
on
quote.
page 48, but I'm not sure. It's somewhere in that middle section on personal accountability and responsibility.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. Before, I mentioned this to you earlier that when people sign up for this call and we ask them, what is one of your major challenges? And I looked at all of them. I've got a list of them here. And then I realized as I was looking at them that they fell into two categories. One of them had to do with the internal environment and doing what we've just been talking about. And I want to kind of flip this a little bit and talk a little bit about the leadership, and it has to do with the external environment. So we had probably 3 or 4 people who said, and we have lots of type A strong personalities here who are used to doing it all. And they said, because that's what they do, right? They take care of things. They're strategic and they're hard workers and they have strong values and they want to have lots of service to lots of different individuals and their community. And they find themselves almost in a jail cell of their own making. So now they're responsible for way more than what's in their roles and responsibilities, which you and I have talked quite a bit about. So, what do you say to those people who want to get out, either out of the job or out of extra responsibilities to have more balance, but the support isn't there? They're not supported by their colleagues or their bosses. What do you say to those guys who are concerned about
We
that?
could take a whole nother hour just to unpack this. Let me see if I can be really smart and simplify it very quickly. Um, you use the term obstacles, things that are in their way, right? So you did this exercise with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Internal, external obstacles. I would subdivide that into another category. So if it's an external obstacle, I would
Mm-hmm.
break that list up into 2 more lists. What's
Okay.
in your control, what's out of your control. On the internal obstacles, I would do the same thing. In that list of internal obstacles, what's in your control, what's out of your control. Um, as a side note, I would never identify any of these people as type A personality unless we were at a party and we just wanted to know, because someone being a type A personality type doesn't have any distinction on the obstacles that they're facing, whether they should stay and keep working for an organization, an employer that's toxic to them and unsupportive.
Mm.
What's most important is what's their behavior pattern. You see, because what they can control is their upper brain. And there are 4 different behavior patterns, and we talk about this extensively in the book. But
Mm-hmm.
very quickly, there's a fast-paced, task-focused behavior pattern. There's a fast-paced, people-focused pattern. There is a more responsive, slower-paced task and a more slower, responsive
People.
people focus. So remember I said we start with focus. So
Mm-hmm.
where's your somebody who is fast-paced task is going to want control. They want to win. Their internal driver is achievement. See, all of this has to do with behavior markers.
Mm-hmm.
So the advice I would give to what we call a scale 1, that fast-paced task,
Task.
the guidance I would give them is totally different in the same context. Put these 4 behavior types in the same contextual dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
and what each of those would have to do is completely different advice. This is why, again, we try to, one size fits all. When we tell
So,
everybody, if you're in this environment and this is toxic, or this is this is what you should do, and everybody should do it. Wrong answer. What's your
well, give me
behavior?
an.
How are you being affected, positively or negatively, upper brain or lower brain, by this dynamic? Because responsive,
Mm-hmm.
people focused behavior pattern, brain types can manage in an environment that's very autocratic, very directive, gives them very little room for individual creativity and individual decision making, and their upper brain needs that for their own internal safety and security. So they will yield to a leader who's very scale 1, very fast-paced, task-focused, as
Because it
long
works for
as
them.
the core values of that leader are demonstrated in a way that create a sense of well-being for that scale 3 person. But as soon as that scale 1 starts to behave in ways that violate trust, makes it unsafe for this person to give away control, they'll want to start seeking more control. And one of the ways they'll do it is they'll either try to change leaders, they'll leave the organization, or they'll stay in the organization and
Right.
lower the level of their performance, not enough to get in trouble or not enough to be detected as a sub-performing team member. They just perform less to take that energy to maintain a sense of coping in that environment where they come now to work to survive more than thrive. And this is why it's important for leaders to identify the 4 brain patterns within their teams so they know how to tailor their behavior as a leader to the 4 brain types. I don't behave as a leader to scale ones the same way I behave to scale threes. This is part of the self-awareness, self-management. I shift my presence as a leader. And again, so much about charisma as a leader or showing up and being able to tell jokes and all this stuff. Books have been written, best-selling New York Times books on how a leader shows up. And it doesn't talk anything about how a leader shows up in the behavior, which is the most important thing. I show up for you behaving a particular way. I have a sense of what your behavior pattern is. So I try to behave with you in a way that matches your pattern so that I hit all your upper brain markers. And then we stay connected. And we create this wonderful bond of
Mm-hmm.
energy and creativity and innovation and mutual exchange of ideas. We can even disagree and get excited over disagreeing with each other,
Right.
doing it in a mutually respective way, because the end point is still built on core values of respect, courtesy. And this isn't just about being nice. This is another thing, a lot of bad stuff about you got to be nice as a leader. What does nice mean? Being
Right.
nice to a scale one can be totally different if I behave the same way to a scale three. They're going to think I'm being rude and condescending and mean, right? So we got to get out of what's easy in leader development. We've got to get away from what isn't true. We've got to get away from things that aren't science and evidence based. And so um, you have to do individual analysis with each person. What's their brain pattern? How are they being necessarily affected? Then you can build a strategy for how they can respond to that in a way
Mm-hmm.
to try to stay connected to the organization. Because if you think there's any organization you can go to who knows how to do this, you're going to have very limited opportunities because organizations aren't doing this on a whole scale basis. You can pick and choose, but you're going to have to find a way of finding a place where you can try to impact change through these concepts. And the first place you do it is with your own team. When your team starts outperforming other teams of equal criteria and equal dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
somebody's going to want to know why you get higher retention rate of your staff, why your patient quality data is better, why your revenue is higher, why your expenses are down, why you have less absenteeism, why you have, pick the marker, right? You're going to be in your team, you can outperform in your team, and somebody's going to want to know why.
Right, of course. Right. What I want what they're having.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
All right. So as we start to wrap up here a little bit, that was brilliant. It reminds me of why we're doing the work that we are doing together. You said something. I know that we have a couple of doctors on here in different modalities and some HR, head of HR personalities and some other coaches on here as well. What is your recommendation for those leaders? I know that we've got the performance indicator, the test that we can take. If they're not doing that, if you're not going to recommend that test and they don't know what scale people are at, what is the in addition to self-awareness and the things that we've talked about in general, what is the one thing that you would say to them for, and I'm specifically thinking about the people who are running, and trying to get out of that. What would be the one thing that you would say, if you can, where they should start if they can't, if they don't have those tools?
So the first thing to the HR colleagues on the call, and I invite you to come off mic and we can talk about this. My recommendation is that you have to split technical function of human resources into two baskets. One has to be the traditional human resources, regulatory, legal, all the things that keep you as an organization, from getting taken to court
Hmm.
for violation of OSHA practices, violation of protective status of individuals. And there I'm talking about American with disabilities, the legal ramifications of employing
Hmm.
people to work for your organization. The second part of HR needs to be folks who are solely trained and developed to work on managing the talent of the organization. And this is the part of human resources in talent management that would look for a valid assessment. These aren't tests. We use the word assessment because you say, I need you to take this behavior test. People go lower brain immediately. They think pass fail. When you see the summary scale chart and somebody's got a 5 on one of the scales, they think they've got enough. And then it says compassionate, empathic, and they think, wait a minute, I'm compassionate, I'm empathic. This tool is wrong, right? And you got them blowing up their lower brain. It's an assessment. We're looking to determine your brain type and how your brain physiologically responds to certain behavior dynamics and certain environmental factors. Because we know that about you, we can then construct an environment, and we can train and develop people in the behaviors that are to accentuate your upper brain so that you stay safe, you stay healthy, you stay engaged, and all the technical skill of your upper brain gets released at its highest level. So that's the first thing. You've got to have people who are specifically going to focus on
Talent
creating,
management.
training the talent, performance, wellness component. And if you have a wellness thing already, you could morph it, because most of that wellness work isn't helping anymore because the stress dynamics have exceeded. It's what's called an allostatic load.
Mm-hmm.
We all have a place, and it's different for each of us, where we hit enough negative stress where my upper brain turns off and I've got to go to lower brain, and I've got to go there to survive. And so I literally turn off my working performance brain to turn on my survival brain. And we've got to be able to manage that. We've got to have indicators for that. And it's a bell curve. It comes from the work at the turn of the 20th century, the Yerke-Dodson model. We have it in the book. We talk about it. We've updated it extensively because it's not just enough to have people on the left side of the bell curve in a good place. You need
Mm-hmm.
them at the peak of the bell curve,
Mm-hmm.
because competition is getting too severe. The innovation and changes of competition is happening too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
If you just stay in your comfort zone and everybody's feeling good on the left side of that bell curve, your stretch zone where real performance comes, your competitors get in a stretch zone while you stay in a comfort zone, you're done. And you're not done because you're not a great organization. You're just going to go bankrupt.
Right.
Um, and this Chinese AI release this week should
Yep.
show how quickly innovation can be a disruptor to markets and to, I mean, it's just that.
Instant.
This is
Yeah.
why we need to free up our brain, because we have to be able to manage chaos of change, even the change that we're creating, in an upper brain positive way. This isn't a political statement, but I heard a renowned Democrat last night say, we're being overwhelmed. The change is coming too quickly. We're
Mm-hmm.
getting fatigued. We can't manage all this stuff that's coming at us. Well, that's intentional. The current administration isn't doing that by accident. They didn't luck into this. Somebody knows that you can overwhelm the performance capacity of an adversary or a
Uh-huh.
political, or an opposing political party. You can disrupt the upper brain of another AI company or another hospital system. And I hate to think of the idea that if we've got multi-hospital systems in a community that they're competing with each other, because I think they ought to be in collaboration with each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when you have a minimalist mentality and about revenue, and your objective is to fight for revenue rather than enhance the quality of patient care delivery and draw patients to you because your outcomes serve the interest of patients better than the hospital across town, that's my distinction of a positive goal versus a negative goal.
I can imagine knowing who the people are who are on this are like just kind of jumping up and down in their seats, because I think you've just articulated what I hear from at least a couple of the doctors, chiropractors that are in this group.
And one
So,
last point about that, you've got
what's
to
that?
win. One more point about this.
Yeah.
In order to make this happen and to be a change agent of this in your organization, you have to win and influence the heart and mind of the senior decision maker. You have got to get access to the person who has the authority, pardon this analogy, who can write the executive order. You've
Right.
got to
Right. Right.
get somebody in your organization who will listen to this, who can become a believer in this, a practitioner in this. Give them a copy of a book for a birthday present or a Christmas present. Ask them to read it. Ask them to see if the senior leadership team of the organization can do a journal book club study of these principles, right? And I guarantee you, you're going to read something that you haven't read in any other book, because there is no other book that was written. The reason I wrote this book was to write something different that hasn't been written about effective leadership and how it's transformational. And I really mean that transformational in the lives of people, not just at work,
Mm-hmm.
in their
Mm-hmm.
life, how they live life in this upper brain mindset that manages physiological brain responses to environmental dynamics, positive, negative, productive, unproductive. And part of that environmental management dynamic
Mm-hmm.
is leadership behavior. Leadership behavior, upper brain or lower brain, becomes an environmental factor to your overall health, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical health, and the quality and productivity of your life.
And that circles us all the way back to what we started with, right? Right at the very beginning of this.
Can you imagine
So,
that? You
how
almost
about
thought I did
that?
that on purpose.
We love circles and we love threes, right? So, okay, that's a great way to bring all of this together. So, Michael, thank you again for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Absolutely. My blessing. Thank you.
If anybody wondered if he was really passionate about it, you know that he really is. And I know that our listeners have walked away with many actionable ideas. And so, everyone who is here, I want to say thank you for being here today. And I want to remind you that in January, we opened up this circle, the Healthy Leader Inner Circle, to leaders outside of the client base. And so you guys have until January 31st to take advantage of a great opportunity to come inside and be a part of this place where we are having these difficult conversations and sharing with one another mentally, emotionally, physically, and as Michael would say, spiritually. And I agree because leadership isn't just what you do, it's how you show up. So when we are leading, the clarity in our mind becomes team direction for everyone else. The compassion in our hearts creates a climate of trust. And then the courage that you have to do your right thing inspires action, as we have just discussed all over the place today in the people that we are leading. So have a wonderful day and remember to lead well.